Nomi Spain Levy, thank you so much for joining us on the Plant Trainers podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk a very interesting topic that we don't always hear a lot talked about. So that's exciting for me.
Good, because our audience knows that I love talking about poop. So get your poop hats on, everybody. We're going to be talking about poop or lack thereof today. But before we get into that topic, do you have a moment of gratitude that you want to share with us and our listeners?
Yes, I had an unexpected day off early with my kids, and I got to just enjoy an afternoon. And it was kind of a surprise. I forgot that they didn't have the day off, that they had the day off, and I got to just have a spontaneous day, which I needed.
Beautiful. Did you do something special or did you just hang out?
We actually went to get my son new shoes. His shoes had holes in them from playing soccer nonstop. And that was very gratifying as well, because he insisted on wearing the shoes that were literally falling apart. So I was also happy we found shoes in like 2 store stops.
For some reason, they like to wear shoes that have holes in them and that are untied. And it's just amazing. These kids are amazing.
Yeah, untied.
They're creatures of habits for sure. So talking about habits, how did you get into the healthy lifestyle, healthy habits lifestyle for yourself? Was that something that you were just kind of born into, or did it develop from somewhere?
So actually, I was born not into it. I think my parents were very intentional. I was raised in the Midwest in Minnesota in the 80s and 90s. And if we look back at nutritional recommendations during that period, there wasn't a lot of nutritional biochemistry. That was something that the doctors were using to make their informed decisions. And so it was low fat, lots of fake foods, lots of processed foods. And I would say that I grew up with a fair amount of those. And as I got older, at one point, I moved to Hong Kong. And when I moved to Hong Kong, I started doing yoga. And I worked with a Swami there. I was studying under him. And he didn't speak a lot of English, but he started to give me nutritional advice. And it opened up my mind. I picked up a book. I can't remember now. I think my brother took it. It was some sort of health and wellness book. I picked that up and I read it, and it just started, that was like 20 years ago. And it started this interest in nutrition. Eventually, I had a bunch of kids, got married, had a bunch of kids, and went back to school. And at one point I sat down with my husband and I'm like, I need to go back to school and continue this journey that I started. And so eventually I finished my undergrad, and then I went to grad school and I did a master's in nutrition and functional medicine. Prior to that, I also trained as a health and wellness coach at Duke University at their Integrative Medicine Center. So that was it took a long time for me to get to the place where I was sharing it with other people, but it was a very organic process.
That's great. So we found yoga living in Hong Kong as well. We didn't think of yoga as exercise or a sport or anything like that before we moved to Hong Kong. So that's really interesting that's where you found yoga. And
did we make this connection?
I think we did. Did we not?
Well, you just did now.
Well, we just did now. We'll figure out the dates after.
We have to talk about this. Okay, to be continued. Next, okay.
To be continued. So through your health journey, you are now, I'd call you a constipation expert. Let's talk a little bit about constipation and constipation for women specifically. How does it differ for women? Or let's first say what constipation actually is. Like, at what point does not pooping become just missing a poop or actually being constipation?
Great, that's a great question. So in terms of medically, what's considered constipation is a bowel movement 3 times or less per week. But really, from a functional medicine perspective, we need to have a daily bowel movement. 3 times a week is not adequate. 4 times a week is not adequate. It needs to be 7 times a week. You can also have people who are having regular bowel movements. However, they're not having full fecal evacuation. So they're not feeling like they're actually getting anything out, or the consistency of their stool indicates that they're not moving things through in a smooth way. So it's when the consistency should be like toothpaste as opposed to more hard than that and more separated than that. So that's really sort of the medical definition of constipation versus the functional medicine definition of constipation. And it definitely does differ for men and women.
So I know that some people say that you need to go to the bathroom every time you eat. And if you're not going to the bathroom every time you eat, then your gut is not working at its full capacity. Would you agree with that?
I don't agree with that, although I will say that there are some functional medicine practitioners in the field, well recognized, who will say that when, in particular, a woman is going through a hormonal issue and there's estrogen excess, like for example in endometriosis, that yes, you should get them to the point where they are going to the bathroom with every single meal. And the reason for that is because one of the ways that we excrete cholesterol and extra hormones, endogenously produced compounds, those are the things that we make inside our body, or exogenously produced compounds, those are the things that we take in from the environment. So one of the ways that we get rid of them is through the gut, is through binding with fiber and then having a bowel movement. So we want to make sure that we're having regular bowel movements. And if somebody is having a hormonal issue, then we can kind of assume that there's something going on, and we want to keep everything moving through so that it's not staying in their system and then either being reabsorbed, because that's what happens with constipation, really. That's the issue, is that the fecal matter sits in the colon. The liquid, why does it become dry? Because of the time sitting there, the liquid reabsorbs back into the mucosal tissue. And then that actually is not healthy for the tissue there, because this is stuff the body's trying to get rid of. So I would say that really minimum once a day. And at the same time, there are people who have IBS, and it's the diarrhea dominant IBS, and they'll have way too many bowel movements. And that's actually an issue as well, because then there's an issue with nutrient absorption.
Well, you mentioned so many things in there, and that's something that we've always talked about in terms of colon rectal cancer, that being so high these days because of constipation and because of extra carcinogens in the diet, and all of that being reabsorbed into the colon and into the digestive system as they're holding it in their bodies. So that's one big thing. And I think that's one of the major, for me, in terms of the research that I've done and the other interviews that we've done, that's one of the major reasons for colon and rectal cancer.
There is an association I mean, if we look across even the pediatric population, studies have shown us that even kids who are constipated have higher rates of asthma, autoimmune disorders. So there's something going on that when somebody's digestive system is slow, because the digestive system does contain about 70% of the immune tissue, that it is going to interact with the immune system and affect how it acts. And when it comes to adults and colorectal cancer, yes, constipation is so preventable and so easy to educate around, but people are uncomfortable to talk about it. So I'm always surprised when people will actually, on my intake forms when I'm with clients, leave the constipation part blank. They just won't answer the question, and they'll answer everything else. And I think sometimes people are just really uncomfortable to talk about it.
What are the biggest causes of constipation? And does it differ between men, women, and kids, or is it all the same?
Okay, so that's a great question. Well, I'm always going to say, look at the diet. A large percentage of the American Western population is deficient in fiber. They're getting an average of 14 grams of fiber a day. The minimum is really somewhere from 25 grams to 30 for women and upwards of 35 to 40 for men. So that's going to be one thing, is inadequate fiber. Inadequate hydration, keeping everything moving, that's also really important to keep that fiber moving through the system. However, when it comes to women, and I would also add in movement to keep those wave-like contractions that keep everything moving through the gut, that's important. We need to be walking regularly. We need to be moving. We're not made to be sedentary, but kind of happened. And so it's really important to be getting movement throughout the day. But when it comes to women, there's added components. And I think that's the most important thing to remember, is that generally, constipation was treated as sort of an asexual disease. It was not contributed to either gender. It wasn't like PMS or breast cancer where it was assigned to a gender. It was considered to act the same in both men and women. And now we understand that actually constipation has a lot more going on with women, that are things that are specific, that are influencing it. So for example, first of all, there's the presence of hormones like estrogen and progesterone. And remember, women don't have a constant hormonal cycle. It's not like men who have, depending on their health and assuming they don't have sleep apnea or abdominal adiposity, men's testosterone is pretty steady throughout their lifespan, through the majority of their lifespan. However, when it comes to women, they have hormonal changes at adolescence. They have hormonal changes every month. They have hormonal changes for the 10 years leading up to menopause, and then they have a final hormone shift after menopause. And so it's really important to remember that those are going to affect bowel movements because estrogen and progesterone play a role in the gut. When it comes to women's gastrointestinal tract, we actually have, at the company I work for, we have OBGYN on our board of advisors, and she says the gastrointestinal tract is a female organ, meaning that in women, it has a very specific, different way of acting than in men. And so what she means by that is really, if we think about it, number one, from the digestive tract, the mouth, all the way to exit zone, to the anus, it's really, women have more taste buds. Women have different gastric acid secretions depending on their estrogen amount. They have different enzymes in their small intestine depending on the amount of estrogen that's present. So they also have more turns and kinks and turns to get around the uterus and different organs that are in there that men don't have. And additionally, their digestive tract is longer. The studies show that a woman's digestion takes 14 hours longer than a man's. That's almost half a day more. So women are going to be more prone to bloating, nausea, and constipation. So there's a lot more going on with women's digestion, and therefore making constipation something that needs to be treated differently for women. It can't just be a laxative to induce those wave-like motions and help the bowel relax. It has to take into account, what are we doing with everything else that's going on in a person's life, and how do we treat constipation in a holistic way?
That's super interesting, and a lot of things there that I had never really thought of before or read about before. So it's more than just upping the fiber and moving. I mean, these are the things that we need to do on a daily basis for mental health, for physical health, for bowel movements, and for everything preventatively. But then when you're actually in that situation where you need to force things to move, it's not just, and it shouldn't really be, but it's not just the same laxatives off the shelf that the rest of society is going to go take.
Exactly, because for women, if, for example, you could have a woman who doesn't have constipation her whole life, is eating a great diet, is moving, is adequately hydrated, and then all of a sudden she hits perimenopause and everything is changing because her estrogen and progesterone levels are changing. And so those are things that someone would say, okay, HRT or not HRT, whatever their choice is how to manage menopause, they still need to be having a daily bowel movement in that time until they find another solution. And so I think that it's important to think about, how do we make sure that there's not a one size fits all solution, because that's the future right now of nutrition and medicine is, sorry about that. The future of medicine is really individualized and personalized nutrition and interventions. And then there's also stratified interventions where we're looking at things that are going to be different between the genders. And for example, there's a lot of conditions that are treated as generic, and really they're acting differently in men and women. And I think that's important to consider. And it's important to discuss with one's doctor.
Yeah, we've talked about every body is different so often, and everyone needs to be treated appropriately based on what they're going through individually.
Definitely. So is there any kind of stress or psychological or spiritual, does any of that affect constipation? I know that that's big with children. Sometimes they have the fear of the toilet or fear of being alone or fear of the poop and things like that. But when it comes to adults, can stress keep you from pooping?
100%. And that's actually really, I think, an important thing to acknowledge. I'll say that one of the things I noticed in clinical practice is that when I have a client who comes in and either they're going to say, I have a history of anxiety, or I have anxiety, or they say I have a history of constipation, like I know these two are hanging out together. I know constipation and anxiety are hanging out together. Because what's going on in the gut is going on in the brain. And that's something that we've spent so much time researching, but the microbiome is so cool. And one of the things I think actually is really cool is to think about when we think of the gut and we think of like the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, what we're really thinking about in terms of the densest area of good bacteria is the large intestine. And what's really interesting is that when we eat a diet that is rich in processed foods, or it's too much protein and too much animal-based proteins where there's not enough plant sources, then what's going to happen is that the microbiome has different types of bacteria, and those different types of bacteria feed on different things. They need carbohydrates for fermentation. And so one of the things that happens is that you can actually have bacteria that have, for example, a preference for sugar. So if we're eating a refined carbohydrate, highly processed diet, so those bacteria will overgrow. The bacteria that prefer other types of food will die off. And then those sugar-growing bacteria can actually hijack the vagus nerve, and that can produce cravings in the brain. And then people are like, I'm craving sweets all the time. And it's like, yes, you're craving sweets, but it's also because you haven't nourished your gut to the point where the bacteria balance is giving you the right signals. And so what's going on is in the gut is going on in the brain. And I know that when somebody is dealing with anxiety, there's times where I can't necessarily, I'm not a psychologist, I can't help their anxiety, but I can help them to have a regular bowel movement. And I can make sure that we do some dietary interventions, up their fiber, up their legumes, up their whole grains, and that can get them moving. And a lot of times that takes a lot of the physical stress off their body, and they feel better emotionally. There's always a link.
There is always a link. And I think that that's interesting that you can affect the, we've always talked about the connection between the gut and the brain and all of that. And, now it's kind of like gut brain poop. It's all together, and you can affect one through all the others. So I want to take a couple of minutes to just talk about Organza and what they're doing to help women specifically with constipation. And of course, it's all about making sure you never need to go there, right? Do all the things in advance, but when you do, what's there. And I also just want to put the disclaimer, I just think this is a really cool product. We don't have anything to do with it. No monetary, no monetary gain for us here. I just want people to be using what they should be using, and don't go to Walmart and just pull something off the shelf.
Don't take Miralax. No, there's a lot. I think that's the main thing. I think, first of all, Organza is so interesting in that it's the first 100% herbal formula remedy specifically made for women's constipation that's addressing constipation at the root cause. It is not just giving you a senna tea that's a laxative and makes the bowel relax, and that's habit forming, because we don't want the bowel, we don't want to take laxatives all the time, because if we do that, the bowel's a muscle, and then the bowel loses its ability to keep moving things through, and people become dependent. So the nice thing about this herbal remedy is that it actually has things that are going to address the stress. It has liver support to help address the estrogen metabolism, the things that can affect the hormones that can affect women's health and women's constipation. And it has a very small amount of senna, but it also has some other compounds that are just going to nourish the gut and help to make the microbiome healthier and happier so that you can have regular bowel movements. And the cool thing is, the best part of my job, the best part is that I get to work with really awesome people. So last week I got to sit down with Dr. Zahara Yaniv Bachrach, who is Columbia, Cornell, PhD, post-PhD, world-class plant medicine researcher, and she's on the board of advisors at Organza. And we're in the process of developing more women-specific formulas for what were previously thought to be generic conditions. And we talked about herbal medicine and how important it is we talked about the development of herbal medicine, the history, as well as how important it is to source things from a good source, meaning, is your supplement, how many times has it been tested? Because the FDA doesn't require any testing. Is there bacteria testing? Is there biological testing? Is there heavy metals testing? So there's a lot of ways to make sure, is the compound that you're taking even contain active ingredients, which I thought was so fascinating. You can get ginseng, grow it in the same conditions in one area, and then it will not have the 2 active compounds that you need in Korean ginseng. And so I think the really interesting thing about this product is that it's at the forefront. It's a pioneer in treating women's constipation, but it wants to bring more solutions to the market that are high quality and tested, made for women by women. We're an office full of women talking about poo all day, which my kids think is like the coolest job ever, by the way.
I want to come one day and talk about poo with all of you. I have some of it at home. I haven't used it. I'm very proud to say I don't need it. However, I kind of want to just take it anyway, because it just seems to have a lot of good compounds in it regardless. But it comes in like a cute little pink box, and it's very woman. It's very woman, and you got cute little sayings and stuff on it, which I really appreciate. And it makes thinking about poop seem a lot cooler than it could, which is awesome for, like fancy schmancy women. Yeah.
Exactly. And you know what? That's the thing. We're trying to make it like feeling great, feeling good in your body is super feminine. So like, let's get everything moved through, let's get everything feeling clear and good and light, feeling like you should, feeling good in your head, good in your body. That's being feminine, right? Like just feeling really connected to yourself.
Definitely. So I wanted to thank you so much for being here today on the Plant Trainers podcast. If people want to follow the Instagram or check out the website, where would you like them to go?
So the Instagram for me is Nomi Knows Nutrition, and anybody can pop over and ask me questions. I do tip of the day, which is really fun. You also get to see what I'm wearing. For people who like to shop, just to
shop
know.
through what you're wearing. Yep.
And for the product, it's Digestlive by Organza, and that is also on Instagram. And there's also digestlive.live, which is the website for anybody who wants to order. There's free international shipping. We're going to make sure that there are no constipated women anywhere in the world. That's our goal.
So Nomi, we will link to all that you just told us in our show notes at planttrainers.com. And before you go, can you just give us one way that people could improve their constipation situation?
Okay. One. Oof.
There's
so many.
If there's one, what would the one be?
One, I'm going to say fiber. Eat those plants. And I would actually say, if I'm just going to go really specific, legumes, beans. Hello, beans got such a bad rap in the 80s and 90s. You don't need Beano, just soak them and eat them. They're great.
Love it.
Soak them and eat them. There you go.
Simple. Soak them and eat them. Thanks, Nomi, so much.
Cook them also.
Cook them too. Cook them too.
All right. Thank you so much for being here with us on the Plant Trainers podcast.
Thank you.